Margaret Chen stood at the kitchen window of her empty house, watching rain streak down the glass like tears. At 6 feet 2 inches tall, she cut an imposing figure against the gray morning light, but her broad shoulders seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. 17 years. 17 years since the phone call that destroyed everything, the one telling her that her husband, David, had died in a car accident in London while on a business trip. She had been 42 then. Now, at 59, she felt ancient. The investigation had been thorough, they said. The identification had been certain. David's ring was found at the scene, his wallet with his driver's license soaked in blood. They showed her photographs she begged not to see. The casket had been sealed. Margaret had held on to her dignity through the funeral, through the endless condolences, through the years that followed like a prisoner serving a life sentence for a crime she hadn't committed. She poured herself into her pharmaceutical company, rising to CEO, channeling her grief into her work. The successful woman everyone saw was a carefully constructed shell protecting a shattered soul inside. Her only comfort came from the journal she kept hidden in her bedroom drawer. Every anniversary, every birthday, every holiday, she wrote letters to David. Letters he would never read. She told him about the promotion she'd received, the house she'd renovated, the world continuing to spin without him. These letters were her lifeline, her way of keeping him alive in some corner of her heart. She had accepted that love, real love, only came once in a lifetime. She had used hers up. Now there was only the empty echo of what they had shared. Margaret made herself a cup of tea, her large hands gentle with the delicate porcelain. She had learned long ago that size did not determine strength of heart. Her friend Sophie had told her to date, to try again, but Margaret always refused. How could she explain that every man who looked at her romantically felt like a betrayal of something sacred? The world moved on, found new love, new partners. Margaret remained frozen in time, a monument to loss. The morning stretched ahead of her empty and quiet. She had taken a rare day off from the office, something her doctor had suggested when Margaret admitted she barely slept anymore. The house seemed to mock her with its silence. Expensive furniture filled its rooms, but no laughter filled its halls. No footsteps but her own. Margaret walked to her study and looked at David's photograph on the shelf, his warm smile, his kind eyes, that expression that always made her feel like the most loved woman in the world. She touched the glass gently. "If you could see me now," she whispered. The rain continued falling. The house continued being silent. And Margaret continued being alone, forever suspended between memory and the unbearable present. She didn't know that everything was about to change. She didn't know that fate, with all its impossible cruelty and astonishing mercy, had been working in the shadows all along. She didn't know that the life she thought had ended 17 years ago was about to collide spectacularly with the life she had built in its place. She only knew the weight of grief and the rhythm of empty days. But in less than 2 hours, a knock on her door would unravel everything she thought she knew about loss, survival, and the inexplicable ways that the universe sometimes answers prayers no one dares speak aloud. The doorbell rang at precisely 10 in the morning, shattering the quiet in a way that made Margaret jump. She rarely had visitors, her family lived far away, and her social circle had shrunk over the years as people tired of her melancholy. She went to the door and opened it to find a young woman standing on the porch, holding the hands of 2 girls who looked no more than 7 or 8 years old. The woman was striking, with David's eyes, a particular shade of hazel that Margaret had stared into 1,000 times. "Mrs. Chen?" the woman asked, her voice trembling slightly. "My name is Rebecca Morris. I've been trying to find you for months. I didn't know how to do this. I didn't know what to say." Margaret felt her stomach tighten. There was something about this woman's face, something achingly familiar in a way that didn't make sense. "Do I know you?" Margaret asked carefully, though alarm bells were ringing in her mind. "No," Rebecca said, tears already streaming down her face. "But I need to tell you something that's going to be very hard to believe. These are my daughters, Sophie and Emma. I brought them here because—" She paused, struggling for words. "Because they've been asking for their grandmother their whole lives. And because you need to know that David, your husband, he didn't die in an accident in London 17 years ago." Margaret felt the world shift beneath her feet. The porch seemed to tilt. She gripped the door frame to steady herself, her considerable frame shaking. This woman was saying something impossible. This woman was bringing up the wound that never healed. But the girls were staring up at her with such hope, such eager expectation, and they had David's eyes. Both of them. The exact same eyes. "What are you talking about?" Margaret whispered, though some deep part of her already knew. Some part that had been waiting in the dark for 17 years. Can we come inside? Rebecca asked. This is going to take some time to explain. And I promise you, every word is true. Margaret poured water with shaking hands, the gesture automatic even as her mind fragmented into 1,000 questions. Rebecca sat on the edge of the sofa, the two girls tucked against her sides like protective amulets. Emma and Sophie, Rebecca said. 9 years old. They looked younger somehow, perhaps because Margaret was looking at them through a lens of shock so complete it distorted her perception of everything. David was in an accident, Rebecca began carefully. But not the one you were told about. He was hit by a car on a London street 3 days after he arrived for his business trip. He was struck while crossing the road. The driver panicked and drove away. David was hit so hard that he was thrown onto the sidewalk. He had severe head trauma. Multiple fractures. He was in a coma for weeks. Margaret sat down heavily, her tall frame collapsing into the armchair. No, she said, but it came out as barely a whisper. They identified him. They had his ring. His wallet. A man named Michael Davies had the accident, Rebecca continued. He was carrying David's wallet and wearing David's watch. They were friends, they had met at the hotel that morning for breakfast. Michael was driving David's rental car back to pick something up when he was hit. Michael died at the scene. The confusion was honest, but complete. Rebecca pulled out a photograph from her bag and handed it to Margaret. It was David. Unmistakably David. But older, changed by time and pain. He looked thinner than Margaret remembered, his face bearing scars that hadn't existed before. But it was undeniably him. David recovered, Rebecca said. It took months in the hospital. When he finally woke from the coma, he had suffered severe amnesia. The doctors said his memory might come back, but it didn't. Not entirely. He remembered fragments. He remembered being married, but the name escaped him. He remembered having a wife but couldn't picture her face. He was so confused, so frightened. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she couldn't speak. Her body seemed made of ice. He was still in recovery when I met him at the hospital, Rebecca said quietly. I was a nurse there. I was helping care for him. He was so alone, so lost. We became close. He liked me. I liked him. And when he was released from the hospital, with no family to contact and no home to return to, I let him stay with me. I knew who he was, I found his wallet, I knew he was married. But his brain injury was so severe, and he was so desperate, so afraid of being alone. I made a choice I've regretted every day since. The two girls watched their mother with solemn eyes. They understood, on some level, that this story was about their existence, about the choices that had brought them into being. We had these girls, Rebecca continued. Years passed. David's memories never returned. And I was too afraid to come forward because I knew I had done something terrible. I had kept a man from his wife. I had hidden him away. But then. Rebecca's voice broke. Then David died. 2 months ago. Heart attack. Just like that, he was gone. Margaret's body convulsed with a sob she couldn't contain. David dead. David alive and then dead. Alive all these years and dead. The information was too much, too contradictory, too catastrophic to process. Before he died, Rebecca said quickly, he became obsessed with finding you. He kept saying he needed to tell you he was sorry. He was so sick, but he couldn't let it go. And after he passed, he left instructions. He had written letters. He asked me to find you and to tell you he never stopped thinking about you. That you were real to him even when everything else was shadows. The envelope was thick and heavy, with Margaret's name written in handwriting that matched the signature on their marriage certificate but had become shaky with age and illness. Rebecca pulled it from her bag and placed it gently on the table. Margaret stared at it as though it might explode. I can't, Margaret whispered. I don't know if I can read this. Grandma, Emma said suddenly, her small voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Both girls had been quietly watching this adult drama unfold, and now Sophie joined her sister. Daddy talked about you all the time. He showed us your picture. He said you were the most important person in his whole life and that he was sorry he couldn't tell you himself. Margaret looked at these two children, her granddaughters, she realized with a shock, and saw David's kindness staring back at her from their young faces. She reached out and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The letters inside numbered 13. 13 messages written on different dates, each one representing a different moment in David's recovered life. Margaret started reading, and with each word, she felt the man she had mourned for 17 years slowly coming into focus, not as a ghost from the past, but as a person who had lived on, changed, and suffered. My dearest Margaret, the first letter began. I don't know if Rebecca will ever give you this. I don't know if you even want to hear from me. But I have to try. I have to explain what happened to me, and more importantly, I have to tell you that your love was real. I may not remember everything, but I remember the weight of losing you. I remember, somehow, that you were important to me before the accident. And I'm sorry, God, I'm so sorry, that I couldn't find my way back to you. Margaret wept as she read. She read about David's confusion in those early hospital days, his desperate searches through the fog of his broken mind trying to find her face. She read about his fear and loneliness, his guilt over the years he spent with Rebecca while Margaret grieved him. She read about the moment, 4 years ago, when something had clicked, a fragment of memory, a flash of her smile, and he had finally understood what he had lost. In the later letters, David spoke of his daughters with such pride and love that Margaret's heart broke and healed simultaneously. He wrote about teaching Sophie to ride a bicycle, about Emma's obsession with painting, about the small moments of joy that had constituted his second life. And in every letter, he mentioned Margaret. Always Margaret. The woman he couldn't remember but couldn't forget. The wife who lived in his heart even after his brain could no longer hold her. The final letter was different. It was written just days before David's death, according to Rebecca, and the handwriting was barely legible in places. I'm running out of time, it read. I can feel it. My heart isn't strong anymore, and I think my body knows what my mind forgot. But I'm not afraid. I've had 2 lives, Margaret. 2 chances at this world. In the first life, I had you, and I didn't deserve you but I loved you anyway. In the second life, I had our daughters, and through them, I found a version of myself worth saving. I don't know what comes next. But I want you to know that if I could choose, if there was some cosmic way to choose, I would choose you in every universe. Every single one. Tell them I was sorry. Tell them I never forgot. Margaret sat in the garden on a warm spring afternoon, watching Sophie and Emma play on the grass. 3 months had passed since Rebecca knocked on her door, 3 months of phone calls and conversations, of slowly building a relationship with the granddaughters she never expected to meet. Rebecca had been kind during this transition, attending some visits but mostly stepping back, recognizing that Margaret and her granddaughters needed to find their own relationship independent of the complicated history between the adults. Grandma. Emma called, running toward her with a daisy clutched in her fist. Look what I grew. Margaret took the flower gently, her large hands careful and tender around something so fragile. It's beautiful, she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Just like you. Sophie approached more slowly, more thoughtfully. She was the serious one, the one who asked questions about her father, who wanted to understand the complicated story of his life. Do you think Daddy knew we were going to meet you? She asked. Do you think he planned it? Margaret considered the question carefully. I think your father spent a lot of time thinking about me, she said. And I think he would have been so happy to see us together like this. I think he arranged things the best way he knew how. The truth was that Margaret's grief had not disappeared. The loss of David was still real, still valid. She had mourned the man she married, and she had also mourned the years they had lost. She would carry that pain for the rest of her life, a weight she had learned to bear without letting it crush her. But now, she also carried something else, a sense of continuity, a bridge between the 2 parts of David's life. She had read every letter until she had them nearly memorized. She had looked at photographs Rebecca had brought, pictures of David laughing with his daughters, David at birthday parties, David looking content in a way that made Margaret understand he had found moments of real happiness in his second life. She had not forgiven him for staying away so long, just as she had not forgiven Rebecca for keeping him. But she had made peace with the fact that life was far too complicated for simple forgiveness or condemnation. What she had done instead was something more valuable. She had chosen to honor David's memory by loving his daughters. By being the grandmother they needed. By filling the emptiness in their lives that his death had created with her presence and her strength. That evening, after Rebecca picked up the girls, Margaret returned to her study and took out a fresh piece of paper. She had been writing new letters now, not to David but to Sophie and Emma. Letters they would read when they were older, explaining who their father was, who their grandmother was, how loss and love were sometimes indistinguishable from each other. She wrote about their father's kindness, about the life he had lived even after his memory was stolen from him. She wrote about forgiveness and second chances and the stubborn resilience of the human heart. Margaret picked up her pen and began to write, My dear girls, your father asked me to tell you something before he died. He asked me to tell you that you were real, and you were loved, and that was everything. Outside, the sun set over the garden where her granddaughters had played. Inside, Margaret wrote her new story, not a story of grief, but a story of redemption, of connection crossing the impossible chasm between past and present. She was no longer a widow frozen in time, mourning a man who was gone forever. She was a grandmother, a keeper of memories, a bridge between two lives. And though her heart still carried the scars of 17 years of loss, it had also learned to hold new love, new joy, new reasons to live. The journey from darkness to light had been longer and more painful than she could have imagined. But standing on the other side, looking back at the distance she had traveled, Margaret finally understood that some losses, no matter how complete they seem in the moment, can be transformed into something unexpected and beautiful.